Fake dark sky, sleepless moonlights, baby cracks on tired feet, sleeping pride. Voices rise, shadows fall, truth unfurled. In the heartbeat of the city, madness swirls. Echoes bounce off concrete dreams lost and found. Battles fought in alleyways, revolution sound. Green and gray skyscrapers watch without a soul. In the heart of Manila where stories unfold. Alex and Ivan cry out loudly the truth. Scream for justice like a fever broken youth. Every word's a bullet tearing through the night. In this war of words.
Happy weekend, everyone. This is SITREP PH, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Philippine interests. I'm Ivan at home, coming to you live from the great city of Manila. Well, we're not really live, but there we are. We're still coming from Manila regardless. The United States is allocating an additional $500 million in foreign military financing to the Philippines as part of what it's calling an unprecedented and once in a generation investment in modernizing the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard. This was announced earlier this week by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin as part of their announcement at a press conference in Camp Aguinaldo after their meeting with Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo and Defense Secretary Gilbert Chodoro for their 2+2 ministerial dialogue meeting, which was held for the first time here in Manila. To discuss these recent developments and U.S. Philippine relations, the EDCA basis, and AFP modernization, we have with us Aaron Matthew Lariosa, a freelance defense journalist who writes for Naval News and USNI News, and he primarily focuses on development and modernization of U.S.-Philippine relations and defense issues in the region. So, without further ado, welcome to SITREP, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting me, Ivan. I'm looking forward to our talk today on all these really crucial issues, especially given everything
Mhm.
that's happening in the region right now.
Thank you so much. And he's coming from us from the sunny Adriatic. How's the holiday going, by the way?
Holiday's doing great. We just visited Dubrovnik, Kotor, a lot of culture here, a lot of history, especially a lot of history relating to the Yugoslav wars. So, as I guess as a military geek slash like defense nerd, a lot of good stuff on this vacation so far. Thanks for asking.
Bro, it's so you. It's like I think on a cruise ship in the Adriatic, and like my guy over here is like geeking out over the Yugoslav wars. Let's go. That's what we love to hear. So I guess before we start and really getting into the meat of things, we'd like to allow our guests to introduce themselves. So, Aaron, perhaps you can tell us a little about yourself and your work, and what really got you interested in writing on defense and in the on Philippine affairs, particularly.
Sure. So I guess we'll take it from the beginning. So for all of our audience here, so my full name is Aaron Matthew Inocencio Lariosa. I'm actually American Filipino. I was born in the States. Parents came over here. My parents are from Manila, um, Northern Luzon, and Visayas. Um,
Mm.
we they started to bring me back over to the Philippines starting 2012. A bit earlier than that, probably. We go back every 2 years, and as we know, that period of time is when tensions start to pick up, or when awareness started to pick up regarding issues in the South China Sea. And as a kid, frankly speaking, I didn't know what I want to be. I was leaning towards medicine, but every time we go back, I just get more and more interested, mainly because my cousins, my aunts, and uncles would just keep ranting about this thing called about this thing called Scarborough Shoal, about China. Then defense relations started picking up, so it became like a bit of a hobby to follow it. And then I started college. One thing a lot of people don't know about me is a lot of people assume I'm much older than I am. In reality, I'm a 21-year-old college student, incoming senior at American University in DC. So I'm balancing that school life alongside the journalist pursuit because I would like to try to inform a lot of people, especially in the United States, about what's happening in that region. Compared to Taiwan, Japan, and Korea, the Philippines doesn't get as much coverage, and therefore, at least in my experience, I haven't found many American subject matter experts regarding the issues. So that's basically just of it, and why I'm really focused on these sort of issues at the moment.
Absolute grind set. The man is like carving out a niche for himself, and we wish you the best. So I guess as we start off with the meat of things, we can ask the first question being, so why now? Uh, we have the visit by Lloyd Austin and Anthony Blinken to Manila, and a lot of the questions coming, for even from local defense watchers is why now? Why is the United States making this big push for the Philippines at the moment with the high level delegation in Manila?
So the high level delegation at the moment is it's this is I believe this isn't the first 2+2 talk. I know it's the most significant one as we saw the half billion in aid, but the reason it's coming at the moment is we need to look at recent events before that and even within the last year. Um, the U.S. Philippine alliance, especially within the context of the 21st century, um, has been in hyperdrive since the Marcos administration came to power, and especially since the South China Sea tensions started around Second Thomas Shoal, and everything the Chinese were doing to those Philippine resupply missions. So, uh, the United States right now is in a bit of a difficult position. There's global hotspots across the world. We're talking Ukraine, we're talking Israel, stuff around in Taiwan, and we're seeing the Philippines slowly emerging. um, I wouldn't say I shouldn't say slowly emerging because as we all know, it's been an issue. But the awareness on that issue has reached a peak where a lot of people, when they think of U.S. partners and allies and hotspots, the South China Sea comes up, and the Philippines is taking more of a, let's say, more of a headline focus. So, in order to address concerns, in order to reassure both domestically and internationally that the United States is committed and will uphold its alliances and international order, it has to commit to the Philippines. And this half billion aid right now is, as they said, focused on the modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard. Against what? As they said, they will never state in these press releases, um, or these press briefings that they do. But obviously, everything that China has been doing within the Philippine EEZ, you know, uh, building artificial islands and then placing air bases and ports there, and blocking off Philippine fishermen. So right now, the United States feels pressured to assist the Philippines, for all of the reasons we said previously. And it's right here, right now. If the United States wavers, there are going to be some serious repercussions because the South China Sea, specifically the West Philippine Sea issue, is not just a regional issue. We're seeing partners across the world, not just the United States, European Union states. We're talking France, UK, even Germany. Oddly enough, are becoming more aware and more vocal in their support of Philippines. And within the Indo-Pacific specifically, we're talking India, Japan, Australia. All those countries are concerned, or more or less coming together to try to assist the Philippines in this struggle. So it's not just why are the Americans coming? It's basically everybody's coming in one way or another.
Absolutely. And specifically for the current round of talks, what is the United States, based on what you're hearing, what does the United States expect to be achieving with the visit to Manila? What message is it trying to send? And from a defense perspective, like what do they hope to achieve?
So this mission comes well. These talks come at a really pivotal time. I mean, everything past the June 17th incident, right? That one was really rough run around Second Thomas Shoal, where you saw, uh, some people called some like Bronner called it piracy, right? And it could be argued it probably was. They stole a boat. They they took their stuff. They cut the finger off the Philippine Navy SEAL. Well, collision, murky details still, right? Because the full story hasn't been released. But that was potentially a crisis point. And as we saw in recent reports, right, the U.S. Marine forces in Australia were given a warning order, which is basically get ready to deploy for potential scenarios, particularly regarding the South China Sea and the Philippines. So I think face value, I don't think a lot of people realize how close of a crisis that could have turned into. If U.S. forces are getting basically, are basically getting warnings to deploy in the assistance of an ally following such a serious incident. Um, but thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and for now, as we saw, I believe last week, the resupply missions are working. And this mission really is kind of a culmination of everything that's been happening so far. We're talking where it's increased military exercises, joint patrol, that Luzon corridor economic initiative. Um, and because remember, 2+2 is not just the military stuff; it's also the foreign affairs stuff and the economic stuff and etc. So this mission is really tying it all together. Um, bringing all of that and telling the Philippines we'll be here for you and we're invested into you.
So, in your opinion, as you said, this is a culmination or like a cherry on top from the recent months of intense cooperation between the Philippines and Washington. So, you feel that with the resupply missions coming back to Ayungin Shoal, and there's a debate on whether construction materials are being included, but as far as Manila is concerned, this is a victory for us. And you're thinking that this is because of U.S. pressure. This is because of pressure from both Manila and Washington, and China in a sense, gave way in a small way.
You know, uh, and U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken at that press briefing following the 2+2 talks, he brought up he basically told his Chinese counterpart in Laos recently that you guys better hold up your part of the deal and stop doing this stuff. And we probably won't know the contents of that meeting or what exactly was said, as usually happens when it comes to the U.S. and China regarding the South China Sea issues, but that probably played a big part. Um, Definitely the U.S. pressure, but also I don't think we should. I also think there's a lot of agency that goes into Manila right now regarding these outcomes. DFA, for example, right? We don't hear a lot about DFA relative to AFP and PCG, but during the ninth bilateral consultation mechanism on the South China Sea, they managed to hash out this thing. Uh, we don't know if there was U.S. involvement. We don't know a lot of stuff, but I think face value wise, um, this is a bilateral Philippine-Chinese agreement. So that was a tremendous part on Manila to actually get this done, especially considering how the Chinese do see the Philippines. So U.S. pressure might have been part of that, but frankly speaking, um, we just don't know.
Before we start getting into the specifics of the actual aid, let's clarify some things because you have, you know, pro Beijing narratives and operatives already in Philippine social media saying the 500 million isn't even confirmed yet, or like that still needs to be budgeted by Congress. But this has already been budgeted in. Am I correct? This is part of the Ukraine aid bill that recently passed.
Yes. Yeah, so like, it passed and it's gonna get through. And I believe some Philippine outlets called it out correctly. This is basically law now. There might still be some hurdles, some more bureaucratic things that need to get let's say straightened out um, and passed through. But once that bill got passed, it's passed. Um, those critics, and even then, um, even then, like let's say somehow this thing fails, um, the U.S. Congress has decided within that bill $500 million for the Philippines. That's a sentiment. It's not just a number. If it fails, okay, try again. And even if that doesn't work, Director of U.S. Philippine Relations right now, the U.S. is committed towards investing into Philippine capabilities. They're going to do it regardless of that's just a number, but that's a number, but investment will come, and it's a sentiment. That's why I want to emphasize to people. It's a big number because they
Yes.
obviously want people to realize, hey, we're really committed to you. So the critics could say like could not come. It's not like fully in law yet, etc. But it's a sentiment, and the sentiment's not going anywhere.
Yes, and certainly the fact that they actually came here and were announcing it. There was concern earlier this year that it wasn't a strong language. It's directing, it's recommending 500 million. It isn't like the Ukraine budget where they allocated, but certainly, people coming here to Manila and saying, no, we will give you 500 million. That should clarify a few things. When it comes to the 500 million, naturally they said it's a once in a lifetime grant for the Philippines, and it's indeed a lot. But the question is, in what form will this be? Will it be in direct foreign military financing? Will it be in transfer of military hardware? Will it be money wired to the AFP? How do these things usually go, and what are you hearing from your sources?
So, it is half a billion for military financing. And, there are certain concerns with the Philippines regarding absorption of this modernization, regarding absorption of like, we could throw, for example, like let's say hypothetically, let's throw combat ships at the Philippines. The U.S. Navy has some share ones because they don't really like those things. But it's like then they think it's like, does the Philippine Navy actually have the main facilities? Do they actually have the facilities to base these things at? And it's like, because it's not just a fighter jet or a ship. It's like all their support facilities plus the training for the men, the people who are going to crew these things, right? So it's very complicated, and as we'll get later into this conversation, I'm sure we'll talk more about this. And
Yeah,
because of these concerns, they have thought about this, right? So, following those like 2+2 talks, they basically also announced stuff that will help inform and like shape this, so those mistakes don't happen. So for example, right, 2+2 talks. There's this other thing called the Philippines secure, I believe, security sector assistance roadmap. May have gotten the security and sector mixed up, but regardless, it basically creates a roadmap, right, where both countries decide it's like, okay, we have the money, or what would we suggest? What capabilities the Philippine Coast Guard or the Philippine military might need. They identify these gaps, and then they recommend what to get. There's also going to be they recently announced during those talks a bilateral working group. What difference that is from from the security sector assistance roadmap? They didn't exactly specify, but it's great that we have these two mechanisms in place to actually inform what this half billion is going to go into. Because military modernization, a lot of people look at the assets and like all the shiny new equipment, but in some cases, if you think about that, you forget about a lot of the other stuff that makes it usable, right? So the Chinese might look at the Philippines if they get like a half billion aid, but if it's uninformed and they don't really think this out, like let's say you guys got the best missile systems, the best aircraft, and the best ships, but a decade later, half of them are already rusting away because you guys don't have the parts or the training or the facilities to actually maintain these, and then you're back to basically pre-revised Armed Forces
yes.
Philippines Modernization Program force. So that's the big part too, along with this 2 billion, the bilateral working group and the security sector assistance roadmap.
And I'm very pleased that you mentioned that. It's the idea of like how much we can absorb, because there's criticisms even coming from traditionally pro-American or even neutral outlets here in Manila about the size of the budget that's coming. There's criticisms calling it chump change or peanuts, and not just from the pro-China lobby, but even from the likes of, for example, like Professor Richard Haydarian here at the University of the Philippines. And it's specifically because they're comparing it to something like Ukraine, or
Yeah,
it's chump change compared to the expenditure for places even like Jordan or Egypt, or a country that's not as reliable like Pakistan, which gets way more. And
yeah,
these countries are not facing off against a foreign power like the Philippines. No, like China is with the Philippines, and so I I, I know you dislike commenting on the political perspective and such, but it's good that you explained why it's only 500 million, and potentially there's more coming, right? Like
yeah.
it matters how much we can absorb. Do you feel like, based on what you know about the armed forces of the Philippines, this is what we can absorb for now? Like if we were to try and feed the AFP more, it will be like a refeeding syndrome for like a patient, a severely starved person. You suddenly give him a bunch of calories and he'll choke on it. He'll like metabolically choke on it if you were to shove billions down his throat.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually great. It's actually a great way to describe the issue. So let's talk about absorption. Let's, I guess, in that absorption context. Um, where do I even begin? The Philippines uh, has a lot of issues when it comes to modernization. that I don't think, that again, a lot of people look at the assets, because like shiny new, or it's like newly procured ship, we could do all this stuff with it. That's so fun. But when it comes to infrastructure, let me give you a good example, right? So a lot of people talk about MRF, that Philippine Air Force fighter program, and they like F8, F sorry, not F-18, F-16, or like Jazz 39 Gripen. But what they don't realize, it's like even if they do get it, it's going to take a couple of years. But regardless to that fact, Basa Air Base, also known as like Fighter Town for the Philippine Air Force, only has enough hangars right now for the F-A-50s. You know what the Americans have to do whenever they come to the Philippines? Their aircraft usually just sit out on the tarmac, sorry, on the apron, or rather in front of the hangars the F-A-50s are, because they don't have the space. And that really impedes not just training, but the actual aircraft, because the Philippines is a very hot and humid place, and you do not want these advanced pieces of military equipment kind of in those conditions for prolonged periods of time. So that's one example. If the Americans with their F-16s don't have any places to put them when they're in the country, where are you going to put yours? The next thing with ships too, right? Subic Bay. A lot of people think when they think of Subic Bay, they think of the old American naval base. A lot of that has been taken up into the free port, so they're now civilian facilities, which of course do occasionally service Philippine Navy and U.S. Navy assets. However, the main base right now is Naval Operating Base Subic, which has a limited amount of berthing space for those vessels with deep drafts. Basically, Naval Operating Base Subic could really only support just just those high end uh, Philippine Navy warships. So of course, we could throw in the money, but if we throw in the money, and I think what they are investing into right now, from what I've seen through documents, and what they'll probably invest first, is that infrastructure. Before it comes, you have to build it, as in build like all the accommodations and stuff. So that's the really serious aspect about this. I also like the part you brought up regarding, why is it like is this chump change with everybody else? Well, with Ukraine, right? Wars are kind of expensive, and they've been fighting a war for a while. Same stuff, same when it comes to like Middle Eastern stuff. They have very real concerns. Of course, like we could go out of my professional opinion, go to personal, but I'd probably not prefer that. Do I think Egypt needs MRO aid? Probably not, but could argue counterterrorism concerns plus geopolitical aspects. Um, and when it comes to the Philippines, right? Different, complete, a really, really different context when it comes to the Philippines, because not only do you have that infrastructure concerns or that absorption issue. But you also have like, okay, what assets do they actually need, and how are we and like what's that going to look like? So right now, right, Bronner, I believe he emphasized that sensors are needed right now before they get everything else, like all that high end long range fires stuff, and he basically means intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets to detect, in order for a high end warfare to work, you have to basically detect your enemy and track them properly. Um, if you can't do that, well, if you can't do that, well, Brahmos isn't going to work. All of these new missiles aren't going to work. So right now, with that 500 million, you could actually get a decent amount of not, it won't be the best quality. Like it won't be,
Right.
you won't get like an American level, complex to support your strikes. But you don't need that. A good enough, you need a good enough network that it could probably be provided with the money that the United States is planning to invest into you. And also some other lower end capabilities. So the 500 million, of course, when you compare it relatively to other countries, what they're getting from the United States, yeah, it's a smaller number. But when you look at the challenges that are faced, both what the Philippines is facing in an air and maritime, as well as on Philippine soil when it comes to basing facilities, it becomes a much more nuanced answer.
So now we go to the part that will really get like a lot of defense heads like really excited. So we can discuss what is the potential wish list for the armed forces of the Philippines when it comes to 500 million. You hear stuff being thrown around Philippine defense spaces, everything from LCWs to hot. No, sorry, LCSs, HIMARSs, F-16s, etc., etc. What do you expect will be included? And what do you think the AFP should be prioritizing with this defense boost that we're getting?
So I'm gonna reverse a bit the I guess the staging of your questions. So, what does the AIP actually look
Right.
to get with this stuff? And that's the big issue because procurements are informed by strategy and like vision, and the AFP is currently going through the CADC reorientation. As we know, the AFP has been focused on ISO, internal security operations, until recently. So it's still shaping this type of like theory and like this type of attitude towards what it actually needs to do out there. And we're getting, frankly speaking, I don't know what the exact stage are they're at with getting this new doctrine or this new strategy down, but this stuff takes time, and I don't think they've exactly figured out what CADC is meant to do. For example, right, CADC, um, comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, aims to defend at least the Philippine AEZ. But then you kind of get into more nuanced questions, just like defend against what? Do we also cover the hybrid operations from the China Coast Guard and the maritime militia? If we do that, then that also does that also mean that we need to take up the Philippine Coast Guard mission? And then you start going down a rabbit hole, kind of. We're just like, we want to defend, but will we actually have the resources to do both missions? And then you start asking, it's like, how could you compensate that? And then you get into a whole other mess. So they need to basically decide what what do we need to do first? Like, what's CATSI going to look like? And then they could start the procurement. Obviously, there's very obvious capabilities that they're probably going to find, right? If we look at the Philippines, right, it's not just procure the ship for the hell of it. It's procure because like we have certain missions. Um, when you look at the Philippines, right, I believe like almost like 7,500 islands, probably a bit more, almost close to 8K, I guess. Large, easy, very maritime and air domain focused. Um, a lot of people they think of warships and planes, and they get that right. Um, but how do you want to use those? It's just for that. Like, where do you want to station them? All of that jazz. And then you get into like war fighting. It's like, how do you actually envision yourself using these things, right? Because I think a lot of people think we get the fighter jets and then like we shoot down the Chinese jets. But I think it has to be a bit more nuanced than that. For example, right, let's look to Japan, because we know Japan's going through a very drastic change right now when it comes to defense. They procure cruise missiles, right? And I've heard arguments like in person from Japanese like analysts and policymakers that it's like, I asked them, it's like, could you tell me why you think a Tomahawk cruise missile is an air to air is an air defense weapon? And their justification for that, apparently, or at least that one individual's justification, is that he said, "Oh, I want to target the Chinese missile launchers before they could even fire on Japanese soil. Therefore, if I'm targeting a missile, it's technically air defense." So, I kind of want to see a lot more of that from Philippine defense circles, because I don't really see a lot of stuff. It's like defending Philippine sovereignty, doing all of that. It's like, okay, how do you actually want to use these things? And I think there needs to be a lot more discussion on that. Brahmos and a lot of stuff we're seeing from the Philippine Marine Corps, that's very innovative, relatively speaking, in the Philippine context. Because I don't see the Philippine Army doing that type of stuff publicly. I don't see the Philippine fleet doing that. Philippine Air Force, frankly, we don't know what they're doing. I mean, they've been stumbling over MRF for the better part of a decade right now, right? Um, so we need to identify, what missions do they have, and then what type of assets do we want to achieve that, and then we start getting into that. So when it comes to MRF, all these future surface combatants, submarines actually is it seems to be a really interesting point where a lot of people realized, um, maybe this isn't the best idea, because then they realize it's like, well, what are we actually use submarines for, right? We're only gonna get two of them. They're really expensive. They take a lot of infrastructure, and then a lot of people kind of shied away because they're like,
Mm,
expensive thing would be kind of like, it's a nice, I guess, trophy to have in the region,
it's nice
but
toy.
against like the Chinese, who
I-
have
Isn't
a
the
lot of
isn't the, a lot
ASW.
of the goal here basically just like to secure the area? Because like to quote former like uh foreign affairs secretary Teddy Locsin, he would say like the goal really here should be to get as much ships as we can, drop anchor and like cook barbecue over there. And so would we be expecting like a purchase of more heavier ships, maybe hot transfers from like LCSs from the United States?
You know, if that's the Philippine objective, And I'm gonna be honest with you guys. You guys have a very strong shipbuilding industry. Just buy a bunch of bulk tankers, commission them with the Philippine
Right.
Navy, sail them there. You don't need us for that. But what you guys could do comparative advantage wise, right? If you guys want to do that mission, in my from my purview, you guys already have the capabilities to do that. It just requires political will and all of that messy stuff that requires a lot of really big internal examination. But with the United States, what you guys get is you guys get $500 million for military financing and a country with a lot of advanced weaponry. And what I want to, I guess, urge, or what I want to at least like bring into conversation for people who listen to this is, you know, when I see a lot of Philippine defense circles, I see a lot of people focusing on the South China Sea, specifically regarding maritime security and Chinese hybrid operations. But what a lot of people don't actually think is like, if there is a fight and like, regardless of the question, if the United States comes in or not, what exactly is that war going to look like and how do you win that war? Because that's like a very serious question that I don't see talked about enough. I think it's because it's probably a bit unpopular, probably a bit too of a hot take, but that's actually how you start deciding procurements and stuff. It's like,
But I guess like the counter to that is like, are we even trying to win, or are we building a defense posture like a poison shrimp thing, like what the Singaporeans are playing? Where like, I mean, you could win, you could devour us, but like it will really hurt if you try. Shouldn't that be the bare minimum?
the bare minimum, even then, that's still basically the same type of that's still the same type of strategy that you guys have to be examining with this type of stuff, because it's not exactly when I mean fight to win, I mean fight to achieve your objective. That's what winning is, achieving your objective in all of this. So with 1 second. Sorry about that. When you bring up the poison shrimp strategy and stuff, the Singaporeans think of that case. Singapore, for example, right? Of course, their neighbor, they plan to basically overcome any contingency, and they think of like that worst case scenario, which is like Malaysia going after them. And you don't have to, again. When I mean winning, we're talking about achieving your objectives. What's the Philippine objective in this case? Deter that. Okay, and what's deterrence? Deterrence is basically put yourself up, and basically tell your enemy, hey, it ain't worth it, man. But how do you actually achieve that? And in my purview, most deterrence, military wise, is achieved when you have a capability that severely damages your enemy, and you prove that not only you know how to use it, but that you can maintain it in other things. So I would like to see more discussions from the Philippine side. It's like, okay, how does an actual fight with the Chinese look like? Are they gonna invade Luzon? Are they gonna like bomb you guys with cruise missiles and aircrafts? Are they going to encircle the Philippine archipelago? Are they going to cut off your supply lines? Because I do feel like with a lot of the conversation stops when you just kind of get into that area. Because you guys, I wouldn't say you guys exactly, but a lot of people assume that it's like, okay, if we get there, the Americans come, and then everything is okay. But I think I wouldn't exactly say foolish. I'd just say a bit of a naive narrative, because
Yes.
yeah, the Philippines has to take its defense seriously, and I think we all agree
I
on
don't
that.
think it would be fair. This is a conversation I'm bringing up with many of the local defense guys, because it's unfair to burden the American taxpayer by expecting them to be, the knight in shining armor. Like, yes, the Americans will come, but we need to put on a fight. And I guess like that brings us to the before they come, and that brings us to the next question of like, how would a very like how would a poison shrimp like Philippine military look like? What would deter the Chinese? What are the assets that you're looking at which you think will make the Chinese think twice before engaging in overt hostilities, like involving live rounds or whatever?
Yep. So if you notice, I don't know if you saw, but the chief of naval operations, the U.S. Navy, Lisa Franchetti, she recently visited Manila, and she was meeting with U.S. Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson. Um, and what I found really interesting was, on the surface level, it's a very basic meeting. It's a defense official coming to the country to do talks and diplomatic engagements. But what I found really interesting was when they were in the actual embassy, they had these models of South China Sea islands. First I thought they were just, are these like models of like Midway or like Wake Island World War II? And then I looked a bit closer and I realized those are artificial Chinese air bases, and they did that. And what struck me was, we only saw two diagrams. I believe we saw Fiery Cross and Mischief Reef, but with I believe it was Mischief Reef. I probably mistaking it. Mischief Reef is a pretty big development, but what they focused on in that diorama was the airfield, because with the South with the Chinese, these bases, if any conflict happens, they provide the launching point, or rather the linchpin, for further operations over Philippine maritime, air, or land domains for Chinese forces. And if you guys cut off those places in a war, it becomes a lot harder for the Chinese to actually do a lot of stuff. I think a lot of Filipinos have like this defeatist mindset, and I don't disagree. When you look at it, it's pretty daunting. You know, the Chinese have nuclear weapons. They have one of the largest militaries in the world, very advanced military, very capable military. But at the end of the day, there's still some ways you guys could poke them if it comes down to it. Taking out those artificial South China Sea bases, would severely hamper any of their operations in potential war. RAND, a U.S. think tank, basically examined what a South China Sea conflict looks like, I believe back in 2015, and they identified that taking out these bases would basically kind of knock them out. Not entirely, of course, because they still have that projection capability, but would knock them out.
Mm,
And for the Philippines, I think very similar mindset in the sense of it's like, okay, how do we stop the Chinese? You target their logistics hubs, you target their bases where they operate from, then they become degraded. What do you need to target
mm,
them? Well, unfortunately, the Philippines isn't part of that missile treaty regime that controls the mid-range transfers, which basically limits Manila to procurement of missiles below 300 kilometers. That's why the BrahMos missile, right? I mean, theoretically, BrahMos could go beyond 300 kilometers, but because it's an export version to the Philippines, it's only within 290, which basically means that missile can cover the EEZ, but it can't actually reach those islands. What can reach those islands are ships and aircraft. Ships probably not the best considering you're against one of the world's largest navies with a lot of capabilities. Plus,
yes.
the Chinese Air Force is very capable too. Aircraft, though, is a different story. Aircraft. The Philippines is a very conducive environment for hiding aircraft around, for aerial operations, in the sense of if you could sustain it, if you could overcome that climate, that weather. Um, you guys have a lot of these airfields around, and a lot of these airfields are kind of tucked in within the internal islands with all these mountains and terrain destruction. Yeah, all this terrain that kind of disrupts enemy sensors. So and if you are mobile enough, you could probably relocate your aircraft and your facility and your support infrastructure before those Chinese missiles hit that base. So I think when you look in this context, right, a navy is always needed, especially for a country like the Philippines. But fighting a larger navy with a smaller navy is never really going to work out, especially in this type of conflict where you want to target those bases. Um, but getting aircraft that are mobile, that have probably better chance of survivability, to be honest, against these Chinese bases, um, and that could be used more than once, is probably I'd say then there should be the number one procurement for the Philippines.
Right.
And I know this goes contrary to a lot of beliefs with a lot of Philippine defense circles, right? A lot of people look at anti-ship missiles, a lot of people look at warships. But in this scenario, as we brought up earlier, right, which is like, okay, let's think about what they need to win. I think the procurement of aircraft, such as like MRF, should be highly prioritized for this case. Everything else will still have a role, um, because let's also think about other scenarios when it comes to the Chinese going to the Philippines. You guys need integrated air missile defense. As seen from Ukraine, these powers have long-range conventional fires that could rain down on your cities, on your infrastructure, and cause immense damage and put a further strain on your population. Those facilities need to be defended. Um, of course, there's other military purposes too. So air defense, much needed. Um, the sensors, of course, as we talked earlier, a modern military needs sensors to actually track and fix targets, to detect if you guys actually have missiles coming in from Manila or Subic Bay or so on. So if we look at what your enemy is, as in the Chinese, probably, um, or or if we want to be more apolitical, we could just say a conventional high-end adversary that has will probably have these capabilities. You shape what your procurement and you shape your force design structure around that threat. So, I would say, as I said previously, I would say in order to counter that high end conventional adversary, targeting their artificial island bases within the South China Sea would probably be the best way to put them out of action. Because once those go,
Even the threat of that would serve as sufficient deterrence. That, in your opinion, would be what a bloody nose would look like striking those air
bloody nose,
bases, like
yes,
taking.
yes,
Yes. All right.
yes.
So moving on. So I guess like that was a very comprehensive answer, and we thank you for that. It should certainly get like a lot
Sorry
of
for
people
going on a bit, by
salivate.
the way.
No, it's fine. It'll get like a lot of the defense heads absolutely salivating when they hear that. Uh, let's go. So like moving on with when it comes to the other aid that you're expecting from we're expecting coming. We have reports that the budget for the EDCA bases will be doubled, will be beefed up. That's the words is coming in from like ABS-C, and it will be doubled. And so
Yeah,
I believe the U.S. is already committing to about $100 million for updating the base infrastructures for those air bases we gave them. And now that it's being doubled, how do you expect the money to be given? How do you expect the money to be spent? And how will for investments in these U.S. positions help the Philippines and the host country?
yeah. So EDCA investment, like EDCA is a bit of a tricky thing when it comes to both countries because, uh, for the life of me, I actually can't understand. It's probably a mix of bureaucracy, politics, and like slowness from both sides. But EDCA
Hmm.
has been here for a while. I believe it's its 10th year this year, a decade. Um, And if you look at the bases, they're not actually not a lot has happened um, at the original five sites, with the exception of I assume Basa Air Base, and now the four and now the additional four sites. So we're at nine bases right now, and some stuff has happened, but not a lot has happened, and that's why I want to emphasize. These are really important facilities. All of the bases have been more or less used for training between the two countries. And of course, that's very crucial, as we know. That does support AFP modernization. But there's a lot of things to be desired right now. So always keeping an eye out on what comes on what comes from the American side for EDCA investment, because EDCA side investment, it's a bit hard to discern. It's like, okay, what's actually Philippine funded, what's U.S. funded. Philippine plans are a bit more unclear, but they do their own unilateral funding. So Balabak, right? Balabak's planning to host a really ramped up naval base and airfield that are already in the process of being made, and that's funded, I believe, through that's funded by the Philippines. But when it comes to U.S. funding, right, a lot of their stuff comes into really basic infrastructure. I mean, extremely rudimentary. Um, we're talking HADR warehouses, which is literally a warehouse. Airfield infrastructure. So think runways, aprons for the aircraft, all of that jazz. We're talking training facilities for soldiers,
Yes.
right? So, that's that's all great, and that really actually does go a really long way to support the modernization and like the retraining
Uh, I
of
mean,
these
like
soldiers.
to be frank, like we've had these long discussions on like we've had these brief discussions on the EDCA bases, and it would seem like a lot of these were just airstrips that the Americans or the Filipinos built during the Cold War, or like even World War II, and doesn't really have the infrastructure needed to sustain 21st century warfare, right? And hence they're doubling the investments to beef them up.
Yeah, beef them up, but at the same, I wouldn't exactly say beef up. I would say get them to a workable condition, uh, because there's if you do read some articles of U.S. troops in the Philippines, like during Balagatan and stuff, they show up to an EDCA site, and like there's zero infrastructure. So what ends up happening, right, is they have to bring all of their equipment, their own food, their own tents, their own air conditioning, their own maintainers because they don't have places to put the aircraft in this really humid and hot country. Um, so I would say getting the bare bones up first, because there's really nothing to beef up if you look at a lot of these sites, especially
It's
the new sites, in my
absolutely
opinion.
it's that bad. It's just glorified airstrips that need you need to actually have beef in order to beef it up. That's a
Yeah, yeah,
great
and
way
that's
of putting
the that's the big issue, and I'm not. Don't get me wrong. Like these are really important sites, especially for training. A lot of training does happen at these places, but it could be much better. And to be fair, like let's talk about that. I believe they announced the doubling of funds, as you mentioned, right? I believe it was around like 60 million before. Now they want like 128 for this fiscal year. Um, I don't know of the exact collaboration, but I've been looking at U.S. government contracts, and I've been seeing a steady stream of recent projects at EDCA sites. So, for example, I won't, I guess for OPSEC reasons, for
No,
professional
of
reasons, I
course
won't
not, of course not.
go in too much. But basically, these are actually really important. Like these are great projects because um, these are great projects because for example, one of these projects is the renovation of I believe the fighter control center at Basa Air Base, and they went in and they took photos for the contractors to see like what you're dealing with, and it's like, oh my god, like thank god we're funding this, like we're talking like water damage in the roofs, stuff falling through, power outlets that are torn out for some reason, uh, and that's where they do partial fighter operations for the Philippine Air Force. So EDCA is great in this regard. But what a lot of people expect of EDCA, right, is like the Americans are going to store weapons here. They're going to like also rotate in and out troops, which they do, sometimes. But I I actually don't know if there has been like an announced munitions facility announced under EDCA. Um, because I haven't
Right.
seen anything. I know U.S. Army Pacific says it has some sort of warehouse at Fort Magsaysay, which is the largest Philippine military base, right? That's an army base in like central Luzon, if I believe. But there's just not a lot of actual stuff here that kind of go towards war fighting, if I put it that way. Um, Again, it's mostly focused on
Understood.
training and bringing up the Philippine military to like that bare bones standard where you guys could actually start progressing in a lot of things. So yeah, with EDCA, extremely crucial. But I guess, like what I wish to see during these 2+2 talks is an even greater investment. The half a billion in FMF. That's a great thing, but you will need a lot more money, over 128 million, to actually support probably what you're going to give them with that $500 million. And great
Eh,
start again, but
yes.
okay, there has to be more funding into these sites.
And speaking of American presence in Luzon and in the Philippines in general, I guess like great follow up would be statements coming from Philippine Foreign Secretary Enrique Manalo when he told the international media here in Manila that the deployment of the U.S. intermediate range missiles, the Typhoon missiles, I believe, in the Philippines was for defensive deterrence. You had for months and even close to a year Manila saying that these missiles, if there will be American missiles, it will be simply to protect U.S. EDCA bases, to protect the Balakatan exercises. But now Manila is actively saying, yeah, these missiles are for defensive deterrence, and it looks like these U.S. missiles are here to stay for a while. Can you tell us more about these Typhoon missiles being based in Luzon, and what can they do, and maybe uh, care to comment on your opinions that Manila is now actively saying that these are for deterrence purposes, when before it wasn't as clear on their purposes.
Yeah, so first off, it's Manila's right, you know, to basically invite other countries in to do what they want on their territory. Like this is their call. So as we all know, this deployment of Typhoon, frankly speaking, I actually don't think it gets enough attention because it's a very unique case. Um, Japan probably denied its deployment because Japan, has their own outlook on things. South Korea definitely doesn't want that thing there. Taiwan, that's not even the question. So that left the Philippines as the only place on the first island chain, or like as a U.S. partner to deploy these missiles here. So what makes Typhoon really crucial, right? So Typhoon is a post INF, is like one of the first post INF systems, the intermediate nuclear forces. So basically, what that did was, I believe it limited missiles between like 500 kilometers and like a couple of thousand. That was meant for like U.S. Soviet purposes during the Cold War, because around nuclear delivery. Um, so the issue for China is basically, the Americans just sent a system that could hit the Chinese mainland, uh, and it's there, and they don't know when it's going to leave, or they don't know if, like, what's going to basically happen. So this is it's a very fascinating case, because this shows a lot of stuff both on like Manila's side and like Washington's side, because nobody's saying it blatantly, but it's very it's I wouldn't say it's as high stakes, but like it's very crucial for everybody involved. Let's just say that.
And it's very
For the
ambiguous when it's leaving. There's some people saying it will leave in September. Then, like, since it's for deterrence, maybe it will stay for longer. There's no concrete answers. You feel that strategic ambiguity is part of it.
Yeah, strategic ambiguity is definitely part of it. I think what Manila's trying to demonstrate right now is, it's like, hey, China, um, we could do this, and they're supporting us with this, so just be aware about that. Um, and the Chinese, how we know the Chinese care. Because of all the statements they make. They're like, we can't believe like this deployment here is going to cause an arms race, all of that, and
Yes, yes.
I find that really unique, because I of course I'm not a great judge of Chinese politics. I focus mostly on defense. But when I saw those statements, I'm like, are they scared of this thing? And it's like, is this the first thing Manila has done to really scare the Chinese? And I don't know exactly how they're going to proceed with this. And I think it also should be noted that the actual deployment system, as in its current state, is more of an experimental. It's not, I wouldn't say operational. I don't even know if they have any actual missiles on board that thing. So for context, for Typhoon, right, it support SM-6 missiles and Tomahawk cruise missiles. The first one is basically a naval-based missile that could be used for surface to air if it has the proper sensors and network to actually conduct that surface to air mission. It could do surface to surface, which they might be doing with SM-6 in this configuration. Meanwhile, Tomahawk, much longer range, I believe the variant they brought could also target ships. I could be corrected though. So yeah, I mean, basically you just have the system there. The system they deployed it's not a complete battery. I know in the photos we could see that it's not like the full configuration as it's meant to be. But I think the thing that really concerns China here is, the possibilities of what happens next. Um, to also expand into, I guess, will make the Chinese worry even more. Typhoon comes from a unit in the U.S. Army called the Multi-Domain Task Force. The Multi-Domain Task Force is one of the U.S. Army's latest units, that basically has all the fancy new tech that's about to come out. Whether that be precision strike missile, which is the successor of the really infamous attack and ATACMS missile, as we've seen in Ukraine. That thing's been used to pretty good effect by the Ukrainians. They're going to get that. Then they have Typhoon, and then there's this thing called the Dark Eagle hypersonic, which is a hypersonic missile, obviously, um, and it's from the exact same unit. It's from the exact same unit that that operates Typhoon. I'm I'm very curious to see how Manila proceeds. It's like they could allow the Americans to bring in even higher end capabilities. Uh,
Yes.
it depends on their attitude, because again, the
I
United
think the
States, they
view
move at their
for
discretion.
I think the view from a lot of people here in Manila is using these as leverages. If we're willing, there's this view from many of the geopolitical experts here in Manila about we're willing to compromise on what we allow the Americans to bring in, both in the EDCA basis and in general, depending on what China is willing to compromise when it comes to the West Philippine Sea issue. And so
Yeah,
if we start getting good signals from Beijing, maybe we won't be allowing the American Typhoons to stay. But yes, going through the list of American goodies that we're expecting, there's also that $100 million that we're expecting for Philippine um, heavy lift helicopters. I believe because of that botched deal from the Duterte administration to help the Philippines get heavy lift helicopters. Can you briefly comment on that and like what went down with that, and why does Washington feel that we need we they need to give 100 million to the Philippines on that specific issue alone?
Yeah, so that was a very interesting case because the last administration had some very interesting deals with the Russians, I guess, on that helicopter exchange. But you know, I honestly speaking, I don't exactly know what happened to that. Just because it's been a while, we haven't heard any news of it. It may have kind of fallen off, or it may have been reincorporated into the 500 million that was brought up.
Right.
Um, that 100 million for the helicopters. You know, I mean, of course, it's very important the Philippines gets heavy lifts. We all know that probably means like CH-47 Chinooks, which are very capable helicopters, very good for a lot of things. I assume in the Philippine case, they're going to focus primarily on that HADR aspect. Uh, maybe they, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's I don't exactly know what happened to that. Kind of just fell off. I just say it kind of just fell off. um, we would
Mm,
hear more news about it if it didn't, but I also think it's not just the money that kind of got the money may have gone incorporated into that like 500 million. Because remember, as we talked about the half billion, they announced a working group to inform procurement, and they also announced the roadmap. And that roadmap probably contains the helicopters because that is a priority for the United States against the Philippines. So I don't exactly know what happened to it, but I would assume with good reason that it got incorporated into this into this broader play that they're doing right now with defense aid.
I think politically speaking, it's a great move by the United States because famously the Duterte administration went against all reasonable advice and tried to cozy up to the Russians, and that a lot of that deal fell through because of the U.S. sanctions because of Ukraine, and we're not getting that down payment back, baby. We're not getting it back. Um,
Yeah,
and lastly, when it comes to what's coming up, can we ask what you're hearing when it comes to the Para Act? I believe this is a bipartisan bill being passed by Bill Hagerty, Republican from Tennessee, and Tim Kaine of Virginia. What have you heard? I mean, $500 million a year for 5 years. It's no chump change. Now we're really talking. Is it moving
yeah.
forward? Last I saw on the U.S. website, it's stuck on committee. Is this thing really going forward or no?
You know, honestly speaking, I think it's a bit too much. I think it's a bit too much because 500 million, as we talked about with
Yes.
absorption issues, um, you know, and things like I don't think yeah I don't exactly know the status of that of where that's going right now, but I think there has to be some revisions. Let's just say about that because they also identify
Uh,
capabilities in there, but they
mm,
just looking at the bill, right? They identify like what the Philippines needs and stuff, but with this DoD stuff, I wouldn't say it makes it redundant because I think I do really do think there should be a similar agreement because we give like Egypt and Jordan like sent like a good amount of money every year for this type of stuff, and I think that's a good political motivator to bring this discussion on the table of how much money the Philippines should get every year. But they identify the capabilities, and it makes the roadmap and the working group a bit redundant. Let's just say that because
right.
a lot of the stuff I'd say regarding the helicopters and then this bill kind of got, I guess, may have gone swallowed up by what just happened in Manila,
You
which
feel
is not a
it
bad
makes
thing.
you feel it makes you feel queasy if U.S. senators are saying, this is what the Philippines needs, like going through the bill, coastal defense, long range fires, integrated air defenses. Rather, it's force feeding the starving patient again, rather than the slow drip that you would expect to build up
Yeah,
capabilities.
yeah, and I think we should appreciate that sentiment because if we're talking like 2012 Scarborough Shoal, crickets in Washington, right? But now, like everybody's trying to be proactive and stuff, and that enthusiasm is great. A lot of people are thinking more. It's becoming a real issue, which will mean obviously a lot more attention and potential follow-on efforts and initiatives to really help out the Philippines in their struggle. But I think we should also acknowledge that I really do like that analogy you bring up with the overfeeding of the patient. We have to watch out how we do this. We have to be careful. We have to be measured, and to make sure we do it correctly.
One of the last recent a very significant news article that I saw within the last 2 weeks was the statement from U.S. Marines in Northern Australia. Uh, Let me get the article over here. I believe it was on the Stripes
I believe it was the one
outlet.
from Seth Robson from Stars and Stripes on the warning order. Is
Yeah,
that
from
correct?
Stars and Stripes, and it was basic. Yes, exactly that one. And he was talking. It's the head of the U.S. Marines. They're talking about how they are basically on standby when it comes to assisting Philippine forces, specifically to help it to secure its maritime rights in disputed areas. And these are major pronouncements coming from U.S. forces. That means the Americans are. Just to clarify, that means the Americans are indeed prepared for speedy assistance to of Philippine forces, because there's a common Chinese talking point is that the Americans will take time to decide whether to help, and even if they do help, it will take a while for them to send people here. But no, this is actually like American forces in the East saying that they are ready to assist with actual vessels if necessary, and it's not simply a bluff. What comment do you have a comment from such a very strident and very clear remark from U.S. forces?
I mean, that sentiment's very common throughout Indo-PACOM, and as I think at the end of the day, it all requires, Manila's say. We really want to avoid that narrative, that completely false and baseless narrative that that Manila is a puppet of Washington, and will basically do whatever it says. But as we heard from statements from NSC, right? Um, it's like we've received offers of help from the Americans, and we denied it because we want it to be like a Filipino only mission, and we will
Since late
respect
last
those
year.
requests. Yeah, exactly, 100%. So we honor what they want to do, and because in this alliance, right? Um, if we step outside of those boundaries, if we just decide to like go in by ourselves, that really degrades everybody's side and only really helps out the Chinese, especially with the narratives aspects regarding Americans going in and stuff. Um, there has been you could trace exercises and interactions and certain things within all these exchanges with the Americans and foreign partners on like what that could have looked like. So what I find really interesting with the Philippine with the U.S. Marine Corps in the Philippines force very close cooperation, uh, and they're very leading when it comes to a lot of stuff, whether it's war fighting or like deployments and all that jazz. But what I find interesting was they were holding this exercise in Palawan called Archipelagic Coastal Defense Continuum. And what I found interesting was it's like, huh, these guys are doing patrols or like surveys in these boats. Like these Marines are doing surveys in boats in the off western Palawan. So it's like it's really interesting to see all this stuff develop. And once you, if you have enough of an imagination or put it together in your head, you kind of see what that response could have looked like, based off the words they said, based on all of that, and based off what they actually did on the ground during these exercises. So American deployment, we definitely plan for that. I think that's just a given with a lot of these scenarios, especially given the political climate and all of that type of stuff. So yeah, I was actually the thing that shocked me more was
Hmm.
that story got somebody on the record saying that. Um, there are not a lot of people on the record who would actually say that, and I do know for a fact, as I know from my own story from a June 17th incident, that if people say certain things, they will probably they'll face, like, I wouldn't say like serious repercussions within DoD or the U.S. military, but let's just say their superiors won't be happy. So I was really shocked that they actually got that on the
Yes.
record. That's a
Do, do,
massive,
you,
massive statement.
do you think that, same with how the American embassy released those pictures of the West Philippine Sea islands, like the Americans want this message to be sent out through the defense press, or is it
I'd
simply like so?
I I'd say that was more of a coincidence of me spotting those. That wasn't really publicized, by the way. That was I saw those photos through the U.S. military's. It's called DVIDs. It's Defense Video. Uh, I forgot. Basically, distribution service for every piece of media that the U.S. military puts out. Um, And I was just every once in a while, and I guess for a viewer, I guess for listeners, it's a really good source of information to see what the Americans are doing in the Philippines. It could be anything from a port visit to American CBs building a school, but it could
Right.
also be like these images. And if you zoom in and if you just look at, if you look, you could spot certain things. They never really blasted those photos out. I believe if you look at the embassy's Twitter, it was just them like standing overlooking Manila Bay and like talking and all of that. But if you went to that one website, you could see a lot more things if you just look at closer if you just look close enough. Um, so yeah, definitely not messaged, but they released it. I think so they knew somebody would eventually find it.
All right, we're coming up to a close with our last few questions, and thank you so much for your time, by the way, as we enter the 1 hour mark. And so, there's the sentiment among many Filipinos that are more skeptical, which is that, everything has a price, and Filipinos are rightfully aware and even sometimes wary of the expectations that Washington may have for Manila in exchange with this once in a lifetime boost to its modernization. So, what does the United States expect from the armed forces in terms of modernization, especially capacity building, its actions in the West Philippine Sea, etc., moving forward in exchange for such things? Like, how will this really boost the AFP, and what are expectations?
So I think expectations when it comes to I mean I wouldn't say this is very trend. I wouldn't like, of course it's a mass amount of aid, and it could be perceived as transactional. But if the
Well, no,
Philippines gets
it's more
better.
like if you give your child like pocket money, you expect him to spend it responsibly. So like
Yeah,
well,
of course.
how would responsible spending look like in
So
terms of Washington's
as
perspective?
that's a pretty good analogy with the with the allowance, because you know I guess there is going to be conditions with how the aid is spent. That's why they create a roadmap, and that's why they have a working group. They're going to make sure this aid is used properly. It's not wasted, and it could be like, for example, right? If they want fighter jets, okay, we can't just give you the fighter jets. We got to plan out an integrated logistics support. Where you're going to base them. No, we're not going to tell them where to base them, but it's like, how are you going to base these? Like, we have the air conditioned hangars, we have like the maintainers on hand, all that type of stuff. So there's definitely like some aspects like that where we have to tell them, it's like, hey, like, you want something, make sure you could actually support the thing and you could actually keep it operational. So there's definitely that. And when it comes to the working group and the roadmap, we basically need to identify, how that money is spent. So what capabilities need to be get need to be got right, all of that. So that's I think that's basically the baseline of what we could expect from that, and what we want to achieve from this, right? And I mean, Blinken said it. It's all about helping out Manila maintain its sovereignty, because you have the Chinese doing all this stuff in the South China Sea, which is concerning. So if you build the Filipinos, you do all that. Um, and there's sort of expectation, as we brought up earlier in this conversation.
Hmm.
There's a lot of geopolitical hotspots happening out right now. The big reason we're seeing a lot of this huge investment, right, is basically reassure allies and partners that it's like, hey, it's not always remember, when we give this to the Philippines, we're also sending a message not just to the Chinese, but to also allies and
Yes,
partners. It's like, hey,
and before you go into that, I guess my follow up for that is what do you think is the overall strategic goal of the United States when it comes to the Philippines? And let's be frank here, this is a political chess game between an established hegemon, the United States, versus a rising power. Many defense experts and geopolitical guys we talk to rightly say China is a rising expansionist power, and so how does the Philippines play in this chess game being played by the United States and China at the moment? Uh,
so
yeah,
the
just give us your
Philippines,
perspective.
so the Philippines right now, right, is like, in the term of like, let's talk about like Washington's Indo-Pacific outlook. They want like that free and open Indo-Pacific, that narrative that you know everybody could go where they want, and like everybody could have a piece of the pie. I guess if you look a bit further, that could be a bit superficial, but that's what they're going with. That's what they're trying to say. Um, with the Philippines, it's such a textbook case of where that strategy should really apply, because you have a country, you have China going in and kind of tearing up the lawn, and it's like, okay, this free and open Indo-Pacific thing can't work if like we allow countries to suffer at like the hands of like a country that can do that or that will do that against them. So backing the Philippines is basically not only countering China in that, but it's also kind of supporting the narrative of this free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. That's why that narrative also expands just beyond the Philippines. That's why you see India, Japan, Australia, uh, France, UK, all of those countries giving them support, whether it's uh, you know the Canadians giving like satellite services, or the Germans giving drones,
Well,
or joint
hmm,
patrols, right? So that's the big thing here. Regarding, I like how you said, and we'll be frank here too. Um, with the Philippines, when we're talking like within a U.S. Philippine context, sorry, U.S. China Sino context, the Philippines, unfortunately, and this will continue for as long as the islands exist, it will always be a victim of geography. It's just kind of placed in a really important position when it comes down to it.
we
Back
get the
then, right, back
typhoons
in
and we
40,
get the Chinese, baby.
typhoons, you got the Chinese, and you got every single up and coming regional hegemon in the Western Pacific. So back then, right, in 41, 42 was the Japanese. Why did they want the Philippines? Because they wanted the Dutch East Indies, and for resources to sustain their war effort in China. But leaving the Americans in the Philippines would be a bit too much of a risk. So obviously they took it. Now, if we go if we flash forward 80 years, roughly 80 to 75 years later, let's get into I don't know if you want to go here, but you said to be frank, let's talk about like Taiwan and stuff. That's pretty close to Philip. That's like direct north of Luzon, Luzon
Yes,
Strait. There's a lot of
the
things
Bashi
that
Channel.
Ashi Channel exactly. So right now, that's gonna be that right now. Of course, as
I
a
mean,
journalist
like,
in this position, I can't.
let's be fair. Like, I don't think like we're telling tales out of school here, because this was already communicated by even senior Senate leadership when they would say that, if hell breaks out over in Taiwan, we're gonna get included no matter what. We're gonna get dragged in by pure proximity alone. And so, is this simply a game of placement? It's just like deterring China from pulling anything and dragging the entire Asia Pacific into the abyss.
Pretty much. I mean, we there was a really great Rappler article that came out in 2022. The Fourth Marine Brigade was shifted from, I believe, like Sulu or Basilan up to Locos Norte, right? Which is a
Yes.
very significant move. And I believe it was Bea Cupin. I probably got it wrong, but she did a great story with Rappler, and she talked to the commander of that brigade, and he was very frank. He's like, "Look, things are kind of changing here. We need to train in territorial defense." And like, it's like, okay, we have to like relearn this stuff because of the proximity we are. It's like there's a very real chance that
Yes.
spillover might happen, and that spillover could come in a lot of ways. It could come in like refugees coming, fleeing the war zone. It could come in, potential Chinese like landings to secure their southern flank. And this is very concerning. So in this context too, right? The Chinese probably fears the Philippines in a Taiwan scenario for the same reason why we see that in the Philippines. These EDCA sites, I think Manila and Washington can communicate all they want that these places are meant for HADR, for all this stuff. But that doesn't matter when you go to China and they see these bases there. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not, I
Hmm.
don't, I'm like, personally speaking, I don't support those narratives from Marcos's sister. Because these places, like, this is a place, like the Northern Luzon is a place that kind of gets ravaged a lot by uh, natural disasters. Let's say that.
Hmm.
But those bases, regardless of their purpose, because they're there, it creates this question. And uh, it
I think
is
the
it,
Philippines has progressively gotten more frank in what those spaces are for. And I'm not telling tales out of school. Like, yes, they're going to help in humanitarian and in capacity building, but even as early as this year, you already had senior armed forces of the Philippine spokesperson saying that, yeah, they're part of deterrence.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it's not surprising.
yeah. So with these bases, um, let's say the Philippines does decide to support the United States in defense of Taiwan in a potential conflict. Um, then that's when things start changing a lot for the Americans. Keep in mind a lot of the challenges the Americans have when it comes to Taiwan, and I'll try to stay on topic right now, is basically distance in time, because it's a bit the Indo-Pacific's a big place, and you don't have a lot of bases because it's very maritime and air domain theater, mainly maritime. But once the Philippines, if the Philippines is an is a if the Philippines is a place to base troops and aircraft, um, then that would potentially be a really pivotal thing regarding the Taiwan conflict. Because if you look, I
Right.
don't know how much you know about Taiwan, but southern port of Kaohsiung is basically envisioned to be the main landing area because that's like the country's biggest port. And if they could
Yes.
that if they could secure that, they could basically take over the entire island. If the U.S. or Taiwanese forces could thwart the capture of that port, you know. Of course, the war is still in question because there's a lot of other things, but for the time being, Taiwan is safe. Um, if if U.S. forces could defend that port from the Philippines, um, that I mean, we're basically talking like we're not. It's not deciding the war, but it's a very big step in that in that potential conflict. So
And naturally, it would benefit the Philippines because we've got several hundred thousand overseas Filipinos, our diaspora over there in Taiwan, and we need to get them out
yeah,
one way or another. I've
100.
got two more questions before we go. The first one I should have asked you earlier, so if you want to quickly answer this briefly, the two countries, the Philippines and the United States, announced in April that they're aiming to finalize a military intelligence sharing accord, and it's called the General Security of Military Information Agreement by the end of 2024. What does this mean and how significant is it? Because I remember the United States after those incidents with India in the Doklan back in 20, I believe that was in 2020. They were very quick. They quickly shared U.S. intelligence and U.S. satellites to the Indians in order to deter China. Is this the same thing you're looking at? Like, how significant is it that we're getting more access to U.S. intelligence when in the past that wasn't the case?
You know, um, yeah, I mean that's actually a great point with Doklam in India because we did provide a lot of that intelligence. We did. I don't know if it was a lot, but I know given American capabilities, it's definitely significant. If once this get once I mean once with the General Military Information Sharing Act or agreement, um, that provides the Philippines with basically really enhanced intelligence access, and uh, when it comes to South China Sea stuff and like stuff against what their adversary the Chinese, this is really crucial because they're like frankly speaking, I don't exactly we just don't know the extent of like how close these nations are, like the U.S. and the Philippines when it comes to
Right.
intelligence sharing. But if it comes in and they could ask the Americans like, could you guys like tell us thing like get us an in to a thing that Philippine intelligence capabilities previously couldn't get into, and then they do it, and then now there's more options for Philippine policymakers. They could know.
I know you didn't want to get into the politics of this, but do you think just give your brief opinion? Do you think it reflects the the confidence of Washington in the stability and even the transition of the Marcos regime, the continuation of the Marcos legacy in terms of foreign policy, even beyond 2028, the fact that they're granting the Philippines access to these intelligence, because certainly Duterte didn't get access to these intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like that black hole of Philippine politics, and like all those like political
Right.
dynasties fighting each other, and they're pro or anti Beijing or like how they basically look at the Chinese. Um, I mean, like I was definitely American concern because I think the American concern is mostly with the stability, not just having like a pro U.S. leader in the palace, right? It's also having stability in the Philippines, and I think I think I don't this is just my observations, nothing from any sources or anything, but I don't know. I would probably be a bit concerned if I hear of rumored coup attempts, whether they're actual fact or fiction. But the fact that the AFP is basically denying off stuff basically means that like this is a serious enough concern that they have to address this. Whether it actually happened or not, I don't know. Whether Duterte and
Mhm.
his clan is actually doing this stuff, frankly, I don't know. But the fact that this stuff's even being discussed, I think, is very disturbing for the stability of the
If anything,
country.
it gives the incentives for the Americans to be sharing more intelligence with the with the Philippines in order to counter these maneuvers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And then last, yeah, go on. Sorry.
oh, go on, go on.
All right, and then like we go to the last question, which is like naturally we're seeing the polls coming in from the battleground states in the United States. How much confidence do we have in bipartisan support for Manila, especially in the event of a potential second Trump administration? Will we be expecting continued support across the board? The same amount of aid, the same
Mm.
amount of like urgency, even under a Trump administration. There's certainly a debate over that here in the Philippines. I was asking Charles Smith, the Wow Mau hunter over in Twitter, a few weeks ago, and he seems confident that the Republicans will continue this because it seems to have broad political support. The China issue has broad political support in Washington. But how confident are you? And then I guess a follow up to that is that within the next few years, where do you see the South China Sea issue moving? Do you see it getting more heated? Do you see it cooling down? And how do you expect the Philippines and Washington to proceed in their relationship?
So, just because of I guess just because of my position, I don't want to get too much into U.S. domestic politics, but
Of course, of course.
what I can get into is basically, what we've heard from Philippine officials, and Romualdez, ambassador to the U.S., I believe he actually did say that he's not actually too worried about another Trump administration, and interestingly enough, there's the same sentiment that's had by the Japanese officials that I was also talking about. I mean, we know Japan's taking preemptive measures right now for that possibility. Um, but also, I think a big thing with let's say there's a second Trump administration. Um, I mean, it's a bit. I would say it's a bit too early to tell. I mean, we don't know what the guy's going to do. We don't know what the guy's going to do until he gets in. Um, but yeah, what I can say is what has already been said by Philippine officials, and according to Romualdez, like he thinks based on his sources. I believe that's what the article said,
Right.
that things should be fine. Like things won't change too much or too drastically. Um,
So
you know,
yes.
go on.
Then moving forward in the next few years, where do you see this going on? Going to?
So, go like the South China Sea situation, U.S.
Yeah,
Philippine
no, the
relations.
South China Sea situation specifically and U.S. Philippine relations.
So I think like right now, I think it's I think it's being hopeful, perhaps a bit even naive. I think it's very good that they got that agreement on Second Thomas Showdown. Whether it's going to hold up, I mean, we know how the Chinese are, right? Frankly, they could just drop it next time because they could just claim that it's like, oh, they have building supplies, and then we're back to the fall or summer of 2023, right? So there's always that possibility. But I think with how things are going out right now, at least for the foreseeable future, I think things, this probably age badly, things at the discretion of Beijing, of
Mm,
course, based on what has been based on, well, I can't even say based on what's been agreed upon because we don't have the agreement, but based on what's
of
happened with
course.
that first resupply mission, I think it's a very good thing. If it's an indication, again, I think it's too early to tell, just because we've had one resupply mission under that new agreement, and maybe if the Chinese don't do anything for the next one, if they don't do anything for the next one and the one after that, that'll be a great indication. So I hope things work out, because obviously nobody really wants conflict in the South China Sea, at least with all of us in this space. Um,
Mm,
having and of course having a Philippine citizen die would activate MDT, and then we get into all that type of sort of stuff. So it's good to see that following that June 17th incident, both sides during the ninth BCM kind of came to some sort of agreement, which again we don't know, and I wish we knew, but they came to the agreement nonetheless. And
yes.
at least from the first testing of that agreement, it works. So hopefully it works the next time and the time after that, and then for all the other times after that. But regarding other things, because the South China Sea is just not Second Thomas Shoal, it's also Sabina Shoal, right? It's like Reed and Recto Bank, which potentially hold a lot of energy. And the energy is also an important thing that I wish we talked a bit more about, because Malampaya natural gas field is kind of running dry right now, and that's where I believe a third of Luzon's energy comes from. So once that kind of goes, what happens? Um, does the Philippines decide to get other things? So yeah, going forward, there's a lot of other issues. Second Thomas Shoal right now, though, great progress. Hopefully that holds up. But Sabina, there's still that standoff. Um, there's still a lot of other questions. So right
Yeah,
now,
and
I'd say
that's
still
always
turbulent.
been the that's always been the perception here in Manila. And with our experts here, the idea that we climb up the escalation ladder, we're as high up as China takes us, and in the end, like balls in China's court. And so, with that, thank you so much for being in our podcast, Aaron. Aaron Matthew Lariosa, thank you for taking your time with us here at Citra PH and for your love and dedication for the home country, your parents' home country. Do you want to plug any of your work or social media? Like, where can people find you? Do you have anything interesting coming up, like a book or like an article coming up?
The thing I'm really excited for is, Naval News is going to be covering the Asia Defense and Security Expo in September in Manila. So I'm really excited to cover that stuff up close and on the ground in the Philippines. Um, so just be there. It will be the first. It will be the publication's first time in the Philippines. So we're excited for that. We also have some stories coming up that I think. Well, you'll see them when you see them, but they're of course they have pretty big ramifications.
Right.
So yeah, social media wise, you can just find me at the Twitter. I believe they'll plug it in the description. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ivan.
Thank you so much. Do you have any last thoughts or comments, or that's it?
I think when it comes to South China Sea and China, and
Yes.
all this type of stuff, I think, I think a lot of, I think what the thing that kind of concerns me is that sometimes, I see a bit too much hawkishness, but sometimes stepping back and like examining stuff and especially trusting diplomats, like, I mean, DFA got that stuff hashed out with MFA over BCM, and that's a really important thing. It's really hard to trust the Chinese. Don't get me wrong, you guys been through a lot, but um, I think, I think a lot of things going forward are hopeful, especially as Manila gets its footing better regarding negotiations and what exactly it wants in the region, especially following a lot of the incidents. But yeah, I mean, last thoughts. I'd say take this extremely complicated territorial dispute. Uh, take it all in, and don't rush to conclusions, and basically just analyze it.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you so much for being generous with your time with us once again. And this has been SITREP PH, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Filipino interests. This has been Ivan at home coming to you coming to you from Manila. Be sure to follow our social media for our updates, for our upcoming podcasts, and for a catalog of our previous podcasts. And we are, of course, at SITREP PH on X and on YouTube. And you can find us also on Facebook at facebook.com/SIDRAPPH. Philippines, thank you and good night. Mabuhay. Thank you.